Hello and welcome to the FARcast here at Chadron State College, where we're interviewing Aaron Field today, who is an assistant professor in the Rangeland program. Aaron, you are coming to us from North Dakota State University, where you got your master's and your PhD. Tell us a little bit about your past life before coming to Chadron.
Oh, sure. That was very Minnesotan. So I grew up in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota, a small town in western Minnesota. And then I headed out to North Dakota for college in Jamestown, sort of the center of the state. Studied biology there, was interested in wildlife. Once I got done with that degree, I realized if I actually wanted to work with wildlife, I probably needed to know something about where wildlife live. So I had to learn a little bit more about plants. There was an opportunity for a master's program at North Dakota State where my wife was actually in school already. So that's where I went. And I worked on my master's degree in natural resources management, where I was comparing some monitoring techniques in grasslands in western North Dakota. About halfway through that program, luckily enough, somebody else quit. And my advisor at the time said, I really need to hire a PhD student to finish this project. And I raised my hand. So there I was. So my PhD work was in range science, looking at a variety of things, but basically plant communities on prairie dog towns would be the more general description. Well, really, while I was there, I was on a research assistantship, so I was there to do research. But I heard about this program, this certificate in college teaching that North Dakota State offered. So I decided I'd go take a teaching class and see what that was all about. Turned out I liked it a lot. Finished out that certificate and started looking for teaching jobs.
So it was it was kind of serendipitous then that position opened up. But did you want to be a scholar? Did you want to teach, or you just wanted to work with wildlife and the job sort of found you?
Yeah, I really didn't even think about teaching until I took a course in education. And what I realized there is, hey, there's a science to this as well, which you don't learn much about in a typical graduate program, especially, well, maybe not especially, but in the sciences, you typically don't hear about that. And most folks aren't really encouraged to pursue that. I was lucky enough to have an advisor who supported that rather than maybe focusing a little bit more on the research. And then when a position opened up out here at Chadron, I got about 3 different emails from various people that I knew who said, hey, have you seen this job in Nebraska? No, I haven't, but I guess I'll take a look.
Had you had any connection with Nebraska before?
Absolutely not. No. I've traveled through Nebraska a few times, but no connection to Chadron whatsoever. In fact, I drove out here to interview, and I drove out in the dark. So then I woke up in the morning and I wasn't in a cornfield, and I was really confused.
This region is a little different than the majority of Nebraska. Mm-hmm. So in preparation for this podcast, you had mentioned that you're interested in how human land use influences grassland ecosystems. Talk a little bit about that. What does that mean?
Give us the high level view, of course.
That's a big thing. Grasslands make up a huge portion of of the Earth's terrestrial land mass, basically. So if you're not in an ocean, there's a decent chance you're in a grassland. And if you're not in a grassland, you're in shrublands or deserts, which qualify as rangelands as well.
What kind of percentage is that?
Varies a little bit depending on your definition, but about half.
Okay.
About half of the Earth's, terrestrial land mass. And so since it's such a huge portion of our world, and provides so many valuable, what we call goods and services. It's just something that's really important. And we put more and more pressure on these grassland systems as population growth increases, as we continue to convert them into other things like croplands or houses or parking lots. So that human land use thing can mean a lot of things. It can mean grazing. It can mean energy development. It can mean conversion to something else. So it's a broad area of interest, and which makes it kind of fun because I get to teach. Well, here I get to teach many different aspects of that.
What are some of those different aspects? I mean, within the grassland ecosystem, I suppose? I mean, I'm coming at this as a newbie. What are some of those different things that involve, I guess, devoted to this region or dedicated to this region?
Right. So the grasslands around Chadron, and really the grasslands in the United States that still exist, mostly exist because either we decided not to farm them, or we tried to farm them and that did not go very well, so we put them back into grasslands. So what you'll see, a major use around Chadron would be grazing, grazing with livestock, and I didn't grow up on a farm, at least not in any major economic sense. But I've always had an interest in livestock. I've always sort of liked cattle. So for me, having that intersection, I mentioned wildlife earlier, having that intersection of livestock and some economic production with wildlife in a way that's that they can coexist is a lot of fun. So here at CSE, I get to teach a course. Got to actually create and teach a course called Grazing Ecology. And in that, we don't entirely look at livestock grazing. We also look at wildlife grazing, insects from insects to elk, basically, and what influence that process has on both plants and then our abiotic features, so our soil or water features. And that's been a lot of fun because there's a lot of ways that we can change or modify management. There's a lot of ways we can modify our land uses that don't take that land use away, but allow us to do it in a more sustainable. It's a little bit of a buzzword, but in a more sustainable fashion.
Great. So you mentioned creating your own class, working with the students here. What are some of the ways you engage with them, make the information interesting to them?
That's. I'll let you know when I figure it out.
I'm sure it's more successful than that.
So that class in particular, I think, was really successful because I was lucky enough to have a small enough group. Students in that class actually designed and taught their own lesson.
Yeah.
So they were able to choose a topic. We actually spent a little bit of time on pedagogy, which is one of our favorite words in higher ed. We spent a little bit of time on, how can you deliver this in a way that students actually learn, that your classmates actually learn. And then they were able to choose a topic of that they were interested in within that greater framework.
Okay. And
then deliver that lesson. And that, I think, was really engaging for students. Students reported back that they really enjoyed that. Now, I can't do that in every class, but in a larger class, some of the things that seem to really help is asking questions rather than necessarily giving answers. So when we got up into the new building last winter, they said, "Okay, what kind of technology do you need in this classroom? We have a budget for technology. What would you like?" And I said, our whiteboard's technology. So, sure, why not? So I've got a half dozen whiteboards in the room. And so rather than talking at students, I'm able to present them with a challenge or present them with a question and let them spend that time working on that.
Okay.
If you're anything like me, when I was a student, I would much rather sit in my chair in the back of the room and doze for 50 minutes. But I think we could all agree that that's not a particularly good way to learn anything. Mm-hmm. So anything I can do to break through that, dozing student in the back row like me, I think is really helpful. And, initially students aren't always super appreciative of that, right? Because you've taken away a really good chunk of my nap time.
Yeah.
But I think being surrounded with other faculty who are doing the same things, students are a lot less resistant. They're a lot more engaged. They're a lot more willing to participate in things like that. So that's been one of the really good things about working here is students are ready for that.
Yeah. Well, we just had a conversation earlier today about the hands-on opportunities. You just step out the back door of the Rangeland Center and you're in the field to do some real field exercises. I'm kind of curious, what would be the amount of time, you guys spend inside in the lab, in the classroom versus out in the real-world lab? How do the students react to those variations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're located in a great spot. I always tell people that if I'm going to teach about grass, this is a really great place to do it. And a lot of what I end up talking about is grass. What is it? How do we identify it? And what do we do with it? So, like you mentioned, that range complex, we can step out the back door, and we've got a natural gradient. We start at the base of the hill, and we have a pretty heavy invasion of invasive cool season grasses. And as we work our way up the hill, we work our way through a few different ecological sites with different native plant communities.
Okay.
So rather than spending a bunch of time driving a van, to different field sites, I can walk up this hill and I've got it. We are limited somewhat by weather, obviously, here in northwest Nebraska. But what I like to do is get out as much as possible first half of fall semester and second half of the spring semester. So oftentimes what it'll be is, 10 or 15 minutes in the classroom, go out and do something.
Yeah.
And the last few years, I structure my habitat inventory and analysis class so that we do most of the inventory in the first half and most of the analysis in the second half to take advantage of weather. The last few years, we haven't had any bad weather in the second half, so we've pretty much been able to be out the entire time.
Yeah.
Which cuts in a bit to what I want to do for analysis, but I think the students actually appreciate that.
I suppose that if it helps get them in that right frame of mind. One other question I've got in terms of the living laboratory is, my understanding is after our 2006 wildfire that burned all the trees off of Sea Hill, we left a portion of the hill as is with the burned trees where they fell. Is that still the case? And do you use that area?
So we do still have some deadfalls in various stages of decay.
Okay.
And it has been interesting. Now, I wasn't here in 2006, so I wasn't able to, other than pictures, I haven't gotten to see what that hillside looked like before. But we're in a fire-adapted system here, meaning that the Pine Ridge plant communities should be able to recover fairly quickly after fire.
Okay.
Now, the 2006 and 2012 fires, because of a variety of factors, some of them man-made or human-caused, some of them not, were particularly intense. So we ended up losing a lot of that ponderosa pine canopy that normally would not have been lost in a fire. And that also can do some things to our grassland plant communities. And most of the grasses of this system, you'd recover within a year or two, assuming you have decent precipitation.
Okay.
But when you have a fire that's that hot with that many heavy fuels, we did see some changes in that plant community, and you can still see some relics of that up there, which is fun to show.
Yeah. Is fire important to those ecosystems?
Yeah, fire is critically important. Fire is critically important, and we have there's some really interesting literature on this, but spent about a century trying to prevent fire for a variety of reasons, whether it's timber maintenance or just simply fear of fire. What we're beginning to learn, I think, is that we can't prevent fire forever, and if we continue to try like we have been, we just make fires worse. So the 2012 fire, for example, was described by some of the firefighters who were working on it as the worst wildland fire that they had ever been on.
Wow.
People had worked in the West for 30 years. Partially because of weather, it was hot, dry, and windy, and partially just because of the fuels. So the trees were growing so close together,
Right.
and there was so much biomass to burn that fire was much more intense than fires historically usually would have been. So,
Yeah,
something.
I had no idea about that. Aaron, you kind of alluded to this earlier that you really kind of fell into the love of teaching. So really, you just wanted to be involved with wildlife, and as part of that was working with the grassland. When you initially went to school, what did you want to do?
So I actually have a lot in common with a lot of our students here in the range program. Is when I walked into my first year in a biology program, I thought I wanted to be a game warden, a conservation officer. And so I worked a couple of different jobs that were somewhat relevant to that. And then I finally got a job working for the Corps of Engineers for a summer position. And part of that job was I had to write tickets. And after probably my first or second ticket that I had to write, and this was just simply, your camper has been parked here too long.
Okay.
You have to move it. I said, it's not what I want to do. I don't like this. I don't like the enforcement. I don't like the confrontation. That's not for me. Mm-hmm. So from that, I transitioned to looking at more natural resource management and strictly biology positions rather than on the enforcement side of things. But couple offshoots on that. That has been really helpful for me as I advise students now.
Yeah.
Not so much I try to talk them out of anything, but I say, okay, if this is what you're interested in, go get a summer job where you do this.
Oh, sure.
One, it might tell you, yes, I love this, I want to do this forever. And two, it might say, you know what, that's not for me. I'm really glad I didn't, spend 10 years of my career on that, which has been really helpful. And then for me personally, I wanted something where I worked outside, where I got to work in whether at one point it would have been forests, but after I fell in love with grasslands, it's become grassland systems. And and that eventually morphed into, I want to work outside when it's nice out. And then I want to be able to go back inside when it's not.
Well, that's you're getting older. And that's what happens.
That's good to have that flexibility.
Well, and you want that climate control.
Yes. Once in a while, that comfy office chair is helpful.
Well, and with the wonderful building you're in, too. I mean, that's certainly one of the jewels of the campus.
Yeah, I like to joke with prospective students when they come and I'm showing them one of the classrooms. I say, I prefer the classrooms where the window, there either isn't a window or it faces to the north, because if the windows face to the south, sometimes there will be mule deer sparring on that hillside, and they're much more interesting than me. So,
oh, we need some video of that.
Yeah. That
I haven't seen any mule deer sparring out here.
Yeah.
I saw some rabbits fighting once.
Probably the biggest mule deer buck I've seen since I've been in Chadron lives over there.
We've got it all.
Smart. Yeah. He knows he's not going to get hit with any stray bullets over there. You kind of talked about that a little bit, but obviously hunting is a big part of your life, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking about this morning as I snuck out early to look for sharp-tailed grouse. But I think a lot of people who work with wildlife, hunting was their gateway to working with wildlife. They work with wildlife because they like to go hunting. And in looking back for myself, it was actually the opposite of that. I started hunting because I wanted to see wildlife. So started with an interest in, African mammals and marine biology and things like that. And then that shifted into spending more time outside with wildlife that inhabit the Great Plains. So.
And did you get a grouse this morning?
No grouse this morning. My miles per grouse are very, very high.
We understand you breed and train American water spaniels.
Yeah, so living in Minnesota, I decided that I wanted to find a dog. I wanted to find a hunting dog. And I'd grown up with labs, as many people do. They're the most popular sporting breed in the country, and for a lot of good reasons. But I decided I wanted something a little bit smaller. I wanted something perhaps a little bit flashier in the uplands, something with a little bit more spaniel type. And I started reading up on these things, and I came across this sort of obscure brown dog from Wisconsin, the American Water Spaniel. And so I've spent about the last 7 years trying to learn about it as much as I can about those dogs and how I can get the most out of them. And they're a very rare breed as far as breeds go, so I've made it sort of a hobby to look at breed preservation. I'm involved with the American Water Spaniel Club, which is the AKC parent club for the breed. So I spend a lot of time training during the summers and as much time hunting with them as I can in the fall, which is really, I usually end up hunting a lot more for the dog than I do for myself, because personally I didn't really need to walk several miles over hills this morning, but the dogs appreciated it.
So how much time goes into, I guess, training one dog?
I think the mistake that people make is that training ends. So I've completed training this dog and I can move on. And that's really never the case. You're always working on something, and it's a lot of time. That's about the best way to
That's succinct.
best way to describe it. If you just want a dog to be your buddy and to go hunting with you, there's really not that much time that needs to be spent. You get your basic obedience down, you get a dog that comes back when you call it, and you go. I've pursued a few more advanced hunt test titles with a couple of my dogs, and that ends up being fairly time consuming. You really should be working every day, and some of the setups are pretty time consuming.
What are those tests like, where you shoot a pheasant and 2 ducks, and basically they have to wait until all the birds fall and they have to get them in order that you shoot them? Or what are they?
Roughly, yeah. So there's a variety of different organizations that sponsor hunt tests. They're non-competitive, so you're competing against a standard. So my dogs have passes, at least, in AKC retriever tests and AKC spaniel tests. So a spaniel test, they have to find birds, flush them, and then retrieve them. And a retriever test is purely retrieving. More challenging retrieving, but retrieving.
And you don't want them to eat the bird.
Eating the bird is frowned upon.
I suppose so. So I have no experience training dogs, certainly not for hunting. Give us an overview. What goes into training a dog to be a reliable hunting animal?
A library of training books. So there are a lot of different schools of thought, a whole bunch of different procedures that folks can follow. My interpretation so far has been they can all work as long as you follow them.
Okay.
So I've been shifting. There are where was I going with that? My philosophy has shifted more towards attrition rather than correction. So learning through repetition,
Okay.
more so than learning through penalties or punishment. So there are a few fantastic trainers who will sell you their DVDs on how to do this.
Of course.
And I'm by no means an expert trainer. I've worked I've worked a fair bit with a couple professionals in South Dakota who helped me help fix my mistakes.
Okay.
So for me, it's get out, set something up where they're working on a certain concept, and then we repeat that in different places, and that seems to be effective.
And I suppose every dog is different and responds differently to the training.
Absolutely, every dog is different, and then also there are breed characteristics as well. So there was a British saying that I'm paraphrasing a bit, but they said you could train one golden retriever in the time you can train two flat coats in the time you can train one Labrador. And the American Water Spaniel, it's just a little different animal than say a Labrador. This is one of the only American sporting breeds developed in Wisconsin in the 1800s and early 1900s, and this was a dog that was originally bred to retrieve for market gunners. So these were people who would go out and shoot a couple hundred ducks a night, and they were usually hunting in a small boat. So they needed a small dog that wasn't going to tip over the boat every time it got in and out. They needed a dog that was tough because they were in Wisconsin in the fall and wintertime, and they needed something that had enough drive to continue to do that. Now, drive and cooperation might not always go hand in hand, so you need to keep that in mind too when you're working with these. Any breed really is, like you mentioned, an individual dog is going to act differently than its litter mate, but then also there are breed characteristics as well.
Sure. So we've got hunting, we have training and breeding of the American Water Spaniel. What are some of your other interests outside of work? I want to say, when you first came to CSC, I saw that you maybe were helping with the wrestling team or something like that. So what are some other things that you enjoy doing, Aaron?
Yeah, so I was a college athlete at Jamestown College in the NAIA division. I played football as a freshman, wrestled all 4 years. Had to make a decision as to whether I wanted to wrestle or play football. There was just really no possible way to do both. And just happened to get along with the wrestling team a little bit better, so I went that route. So I competed there all 4 years. When I got to North Dakota State, I was looking for something to do. It wasn't. I didn't actually have free time. I just thought I did. So one day I stopped by the wrestling coach's office and I said, "Hey, do you need a spare body?" "Sure, come on in." So I spent 2 years there with a Division I program.
As a wrestling room dummy, basically.
As a wrestling room dummy, yeah, and actually got a lot better during that time. Kind of wish I would have done that earlier in my career. So then when I got to Chadron, I basically did the same thing. I spent my first season in the room helping out wherever I could. Mm-hmm. Since that time, I ran out of time. I wish I could spend more time up there, but yeah.
Daniel and I both have some. We have some professional ties to work, and I mean, I'm not speaking for Daniel, but wrestlers have such dedication to their sport.
Yeah.
I think the season begins in October, and if you're going into nationals, it doesn't end until after St. Patrick's Day, and so I mean that is an incredibly long time, and you're having to cut weight and all those other things. So it's certainly a sport that requires a lot of dedication.
There's an awful lot of dedication, and there's not a lot of show, right? Chadron State has excellent attendance at their wrestling, at their home events. I've been really impressed with that. Really great group of fans. But a lot of what happens with wrestling is happening where the only people who are watching are other wrestlers. It usually doesn't look like attendance at a football game or attendance at a volleyball game. But and add in some factors. You add in injury, you add in a weight cut, it really turns into a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other interests outside of work?
The vast majority of my outside of work time right now is dedicated to raising kids. I've got 3 girls. Allie's 5, June is 3, and Laura just turned 1. So we try to find fun activities as much as possible. So far, both June and Allie like to fish, which has been a lot of fun. Allie has picked up a little bit of a botany bug, so she likes to go out and identify mostly flowers. She's interested in different flowers, so she's been teaching her teachers at the CDC a few of our native wildflowers as they walk around. So we spend a lot of time with that.
Do you get them started on the scientific names straight away?
I
figure start them young, right?
The pretty purple one.
Yeah, no, I think I'll skip the Latin names for a while. I like to talk in class about, why I'm making you learn Latin names, and it's because there is one correct Latin name, and that's it. There is only one, where there could be a dozen common names. We were talking about puncture vine when we walked in here. Puncture vine, goat's head, devil's thorn. There's probably a dozen more that I'm missing. But the beauty of a common name is it's typically descriptive. So if I tell you puncture vine, you probably know what I'm looking when I'm talking about.
Yeah, even if it's not the phrase you typically use, it's usually some context clues.
Right.
Sure.
Now, I will. Most of our Latin names are descriptive too. They're just in Latin, so makes it a little trickier.
Okay, Aaron. So now we've reached the portion of the podcast where we just do quick hitting questions. So the first thing that comes to your mind, there's only 5 of them. There's no right or wrong answer. The first one is, what is a favorite movie of yours?
A favorite movie of mine. I should answer this by saying I have watched probably 3 movies since I had kids, because you can't actually start a movie and finish it
unless it's like a Disney film.
So right now I think I would probably have to say Moana, because that's the most recent movie I've watched the entirety of.
How many times?
Many.
I feel your pain.
First concert you attended?
Oh, first concert I attended, I believe, would have been Trampled by Turtles.
Oh, another good one.
I've never heard of that name. What kind of music do they have?
The pseudo bluegrass.
Yeah, they have like a mandolin player, and I think you'd like them.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, they're a Minnesota band. I think they're out of Duluth. So
okay.
Ooh, the coldest spot on the face of the earth. I went there for a football game in 2008, and I think I just finally warmed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right next to Lake Superior. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Aaron, if Chadron State College wasn't the name, what would you name the school?
Well, I actually have an answer for this, too, because I went to Jamestown College in North Dakota, but it is now known as University of Jamestown. Not quite sure why they made the name change, but they did, so I would say University of Chadron.
There you go.
We're moving right on up. Now, I think we kind of get an idea of what the answer to this, but I want to ask it anyway. If you could estimate, I assume in the number of thousands by now, but how many times have you been up to the top of Sea Hill?
It depends how you define Sea Hill. If you mean,
I'm going to say the whole ridge.
Okay, if it's the whole ridge, I was up there 3 times yesterday. So,
maybe the better question is how many grass types are up there.
Oh, well, that's a good question too. I mean, I'll put it this way: I walked out to flag plants for a plant ID section in Habitat Inventory and Analysis, and 50 plants takes about 30 minutes. So there are a lot. I hate to put too close a number on it because Steve Ralsmeyer would know better than me, but probably a couple hundred species.
Wow.
Yeah.
So normally we'd kind of be closing up, but that really triggers me to ask, where was this question, Alex, you wrote? When I look out at my backyard, I just see grass, and I love going up in the hills and that, and I take photos up there, but I generally just see grass here, maybe a different grass there. I don't see that variety. What do you see? So
there's a Aldo Leopold known as either the father of wildlife management or sometimes the father of modern conservation. He wrote a Sand County Almanac in the 1940s, and very, very quotable gentleman. One of Leopold's quotes, if I can get it right, what is one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Okay, meaning that the more you learn about these things, the more you see the negatives. So I try to fight this, and I try to warn students to avoid this too. But I spend way too much time spotting invasive species or noticing reduced plant vigor or erosion features that shouldn't be there's things like that. So if you've ever watched Dances with Wolves, it's filmed in the middle of a smooth brome patch, which is an invasive cool season from Eurasia that would not have been there at that time. That bothers me a lot. So I spend too much time doing that, but I also really appreciate, especially, plant identification, or at least plant recognition. Plant identification means I know what this is and I can tell you why. Plant recognition is simply I know what this is. Okay. Once you realize how many things are actually out there, you start to see more of them. So instead of just seeing, a flower, you see these dozens of species that we have, and Chadron is a really unique place because we have the Pine Ridge ecosystem, which is sort of a miniature Black Hills. We have, if you head west out of Chadron, you get into shortgrass prairie pretty quickly. Head east out of Chadron, you get into the Sandhills, which is one of the largest contiguous blocks of grassland we have left in North America. Head north, and you get into some really interesting examples of northern mixed grass prairie. So we're at this confluence of what we would call, in my discipline, we'd call them range types, and it's really a great place to see all of those without having to travel too far.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a wonderful question to end on.
Yeah, I really like that perspective.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Aaron, thank you for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Appreciate it.